Hello, everyone. Welcome. We're going to give it a moment for participants to join. Thanks for joining. We are going to get started here in a moment after all participants are able to join. We still have people joining the call, so we'll get started here in just one moment. Okay. I think everyone has now joined the call, and I'm sure we'll have some more joining as we go throughout. But I wanted to start by just saying welcome. We're very glad you all are here. My name is Lindsay Streeper, and I'm the Senior Director of Marketing and Communication here at Magellan Federal. And I'm going to be your moderator for today's webinar on human connection, creating conditions for thriving individuals and organizations. If you're new to Magellan Federal, we're very glad you're here. MFed Inform is our insights blog that shares valuable health and productivity solutions to those connected to the military and the federal government. To get to the blog, you can go to the URL you see at the bottom left of your screen here. It's mfed.info/inform. And once you get there, you can subscribe to get alerted to any new resources that we may publish, such as webinars like this. And all resources are free and open to the public. Before we get started, there are just a few housekeeping things I wanted to mention so you can get the most out of your time with us today. The first part of the webinar is going to be dedicated to the wonderful content that the panelists have prepared for you. And then at the end, we're going to take your questions with any remaining time that we may have. So start thinking of those questions. The webinar is being recorded for future on-demand viewing, and all registrants will receive the replay after the call. It's also going to be posted on our blog so you can find it at any time. And your lines are muted throughout today's session, but you can ask any questions you have by going to the Q&A at the bottom of your Zoom window, and you can type them in there. So thank you all again for joining us, and let's go ahead and get started. Next slide, please. Perfect. So before we dive into the agenda and what we're going to cover today, I did want to provide you a brief overview of who we are. Magellan Federal has team members all over the world at government installations and agencies delivering sensitive, complex wellness services. Our mission, as you see here on the slide, is to inspire healthier, more productive communities by delivering innovative, total well-being solutions to the federal government, military personnel, government employees, and their families. And today we're going to be referencing content from a new proprietary mindset training and coaching product that Magellan is in the process of developing. Our expertise in performance training stems from Magellan Federal's years of delivering training to more than 1 million Army soldiers and leaders to enhance resilience, sustain readiness, and optimize human performance. We have more than 200 performance experts on staff with specialized graduate training in performance psychology, meaning Magellan Federal has the largest collection of performance psychology expertise in the world. So our team lives and breathes this stuff every day, and we're really excited to share some of the content that will soon be available to a broader audience through our suite of products. So let's go to the next slide so we can review what we're going to be discussing today. So today you're going to hear from several panelists on all our members of our Magellan team. So Dr. John Metzler is our Senior Director of Human Performance, and Meg and E are seasoned performance coaches. So on the next slide, you can see our agenda. In our time together today, the team is going to discuss the dynamic nature of well-being and performance. We're going to establish the need and benefit of human connection. We will define those conditions for thriving, and then we'll give you strategies that you can start using in your everyday life. And finally, as I mentioned, we're going to take your questions. So whether you're curious about mindset training for your organization or from a personal perspective, there's going to be something here for you today. So let's dive in with our first presenter, Dr. John Metzler.
All right, thanks, Lindsay. Welcome, everyone. Just a few words about myself. I am a thought leader in human performance and applied psychology. I have over 25 years of experience in mental performance, primarily developing capabilities in the military context. And I served as one of 4 expert reviewers of a draft of the Surgeon General's framework for mental health and well-being in the workplace that was released late last year that you may have seen. I'm going to talk about the dynamic nature of well-being and performance. If we can go to the next slide. Just to frame things in, first we want a baseline of where people actually stand. And this chart shows a continuum that includes aspects of human functioning from severe suffering all the way up to balanced or true thriving. And you can see that board certified and licensed mental health providers are important, and they're trained to provide support when a person is suffering or struggling. And as you can see in some of these descriptions, which oftentimes kind of reflects diagnosis, if you will, over on the left, oftentimes you see intensity or time reflected as considerations for figuring out where a person stands in terms of their functioning. On the right, we see true thriving, and we have a rich history of employing functional subject matter experts in mental performance. Next slide, please. The reality is that we fluctuate over time. And on this chart, we think it displays a couple of truths. Leaders sometimes see high performance and assume high well-being, but that may not be the case. In sport, we know athletes perform at high levels in the absence of well-being all the time. We also have recent examples where athletes low in well-being decided to forego performing because they thought it would actually hurt their performance and potentially injure them. Think of Simone Biles pulling out of the Olympic event in gymnastics. And so this shows that as leaders, we can't just look at performance and assume that somebody is high in well-being. We really want to pay attention to the factors that contribute to both well-being and performance and dig into those and make it part of our culture to pay attention to building those. We know that resilience reflects resources and processes that combine to restore equilibrium, counter challenges, or transform an individual or a group. And those resources and processes can contribute to high performance as well as well-being. And with that said, I'm going to hand it over to Meg, who's going to take us the rest of the way on this journey.
I think actually I'm going to let E jump in for a moment too. Hi, everyone. E's going to kick us off with learning a bit about how do we build awareness in performance realm.
Hi, everyone. My name is E. Meg and I together have about 30 years of experience working the performance coaching world with military teams, individuals, corporate athletes, a little bit all over the place. And what we're going to do is we're going to walk you through the rest of this training. And I'm going to start right here with building awareness. So you saw in the graph that John showed that we're talking about optimal performance over time. So when we consult with individuals and teams, we're going to break that optimal performance down into individual performances so that we can build consistency in little chunks. And then in those little chunks become the optimal performance over time. And what that looks like is, okay, what are the strategies and skills we need before a performance? What do we need to put into action in those moments to get ready and set ourselves up to perform at high levels? What do we need to do during the performance so that we can stay absorbed in that performance and be in the moment? And then what do we need to do after to learn and grow from that performance and then moving into the next performance? And the thought is, if I can take that little chunk, right, and become consistently high performing in those little chunks, then you'll start to see consistency over time in the graph that John showed. Okay.
Yeah, and what we've learned as performance consultants, as he said, over 30 years and with the group of over 200 people, we can provide skills and strategies for well-being and performance to individuals all day. But if they're in environments and on teams where they're not supported in terms of well-being and performance, there's still going to be an uphill battle. So creating these conditions that we've referenced that drive individuals to thrive is critical. And connection is the foundation. It is at the heart of optimal organizational conditions. And we can check in on these conditions in a similar way to how E just described, so deliberately and regularly. So Why is connection the foundation? On the next slide, we're talking here, we say that we're wired to connect. And we mean that quite literally, because on a neurological level, our brains and bodies are wired for connection. Our neural systems are wired for empathy and understanding others' intentions. We even have specific neurons in the brain that are dedicated to doing just that. So we're just wired to perceive the world socially. Really, from birth through adulthood, we're driven to connect with others, and we're alerted when this connection is threatened. So sometimes we may think of things like homesickness or heartbreak as metaphors for pain, but research has shown that it's actually no metaphor at all. Social pain is real pain. And the areas of the brain that activate when we experience physical pain are the same areas that light up when we experience social pain. So whether that's feeling shunned from a social group, feeling isolated or misunderstood, devalued, or disconnected. Now, loneliness is subjective, right? We can be alone and not feel lonely. On the other hand, we can be in a room, and I've been there, surrounded by people and feel completely lonely. This feeling of loneliness is subjective, but what happens in the body is very real. Loneliness changes the brain, and so does connection. One of the most comprehensive, longest running studies, which has been following thousands of people for over 8 decades, finds that the good life is really based on relationships, that those who had the warmest connections with others and maintain those relationships are healthier, happier, and have overall greater well-being. So on the next slide, we'll dive into more of the benefits, or alternatively, we can think of some of the risks as well. So we're wired to connect, and when our brains detect that social connection is missing or threatened, and we experience that social pain, our brains are sending us the message, driving us to seek or restore connection with those around us, just like hunger and thirst drive us to seek food and water. Now, if this happens over time, our brains may go into a self-preservation or survival mode. So we become more hypervigilant, our fight or flight systems are turned on for longer periods of time. And when this happens, it impacts our health. Social isolation increases inflammation, cardiovascular disease, hypertension, infectious diseases, diabetes, depression, and anxiety. And we see decreases in cognitive functioning, and especially as we age, and decreases in longevity. Now, in terms of performance, when we feel connected, we explore our environments freely and think creatively. When a group feels connected, our trust, group cohesion, our motivation increases, our minds open, we innovate and create, we complement each other's strengths and weaknesses. And we're really built to be social, to work together and to support each other. Now, this is important for us to acknowledge and be aware of these benefits, the health, performance, happiness, well-being, because this is what makes being proactive about connection so important. If high performance is the ultimate goal within an organization, connection is that foundation. When all individuals are reaping all of these benefits, they're firing on all cylinders and performance improves. And remember that performance alone is not a complete picture of well-being, as John mentioned. We really need to nurture our relationships, whether we see signs of disconnection or not. If you've experienced feelings of loneliness, you're definitely not alone. Approximately half of adults in the US report experiencing loneliness. So on top of the potential potential silence due to stigma or maybe embarrassment, thinking that there's something wrong with me that I'm feeling this way, when we go into that self-preservation mode, we focus more on ourselves than we do on others. And unfortunately, this can diminish our connections further. So we're more likely to detect negative social cues, whether they're there or not. We misinterpret others' intentions, we miss moments for connection, and might miss where others are struggling as well. So this impact is so ubiquitous that the Surgeon General released an advisory on the healing effects of social connection and community earlier this year. You can look up our epidemic on loneliness and isolation, which is really a call to action on how we can increase connection at home, at work, and in our communities. And genuine, authentic connection takes some work on everyone's part. So when people have a deep awareness of self, when they have awareness of others by being curious about, patient with, generous with best intentions, assuming best intentions, and vulnerable with others, they have stronger relationships. And it's not that we need to know every personal detail of everyone's life, but we need to see people as whole people, not just as job titles or skill sets.
A part of what Meg is talking about is, and to be really good at connection, is to understand what is we're calling the human condition, right? And the human condition is about understanding how our brains and our bodies, go ahead and flip to the next slide, how our brains and our bodies interact with the world around us and others. And to be able to understand how our own brains and bodies are interacting with the world around us then can help us how others' brains and bodies are also interacting with the world around us and help us build connection. So let's break this down a little bit. First, what we need to understand is activation. Our brain is constantly scanning our environment and including the people we come across to determine if we're safe or threatened. If our brain determines that we are experiencing a threat, our heart rate will speed up, our facial expressions will become reserved, our ability to hear nuances in human voice becomes lessened because our focus shifts to the environment around us. We are literally unable to hear a conversation that we're having with somebody because of our focus being outside of us. This reduces our ability to empathize with people and ultimately diminishes our ability to connect because we're not able to read people's emotions, hear their emotions, and our facial expressions become more reserved. On the other side, if our brain detects safety, our heart rate decreases, our expressions on our face become more expressive, we're able to hear nuances in human voice, we're able to read the facial expressions of other people, right? This sets us up for connection. We're more likely to be able to be in the moment with people, empathize with people, and connect with them. On top of this, our brains also impact the way we think, impacts our activation. Our brains are really, really cool. They do some really cool complex thinking, planning, analyzing. And at the same time, what they're doing is they're filtering information for us so that we can be really efficient and be really effective. This is meant to help us, but sometimes this filtering that our brain is doing is actually causing us to miss critical information because our brain is filtering information based off our values and our beliefs, our assumptions and experiences that we've already had. Over time, this filtering that our brain is doing for us, it creates patterns in our thinking. And what happens is these patterns then become our mindsets. Our mindsets are just the patterns in our thinking or our assumptions and beliefs that we experience over time. These mindsets then become our MO. They become how we view the world and how we interact with the world. So I could experience the same situation as Meg, right? And when we walk into that situation, the way that my brain perceives that information and how I'm activated, whether I perceive it as a threat or as safe, is going to be different than the way Meg perceives it. Thus, my activation is going to be different in that situation. And because my mindset or my patterns and my thinking are based off my values, my beliefs, my assumptions, I'm also interpreting that situation different than the way Meg would interpret that situation. So when we're going into situations with others, it's important to not only be aware of our own activation and our own mindsets, but also be aware of others' activations, others' mindsets, and realize that we're all different and we're all experiencing that situation different. And those understandings can help us build empathy.
And ultimately we build empathy, and we're able to support each other more, because if we understand where people are coming from and how they approach situations, maybe how E and I are impacted by situations differently, what generally is going on in their life, we're at a better advantage to work together. So on the next slide, we'll start to see why. This is one of our many 2x2s. Who doesn't love a good 2x2? And what we're looking at here is challenge and support. So this is the first organizational condition that we'll talk about, because it's really about prioritizing both our people and their performance. So this is really about adopting a both and mindset rather than an either or mindset. So you see that we want to balance the level of challenge with the level of support for optimal growth and well-being. By support on the x-axis, the horizontal axis, we mean this is like providing feedback for growth, recovery time, showing care and concern on a personal level. The y-axis, challenge, the vertical axis, we're thinking about the difficulty of the work that we're engaging. Is this something new for someone? Is this the next level up? What is their overall workload? So I'll go through each of these quadrants to give you an idea of what they maybe feel like, what's happening in there. And as I go through, think about which sounds most like your current environment, because I'm going to ask you about it. So low support, low challenge, we have this stagnant environment. This is filled with inertia and apathy. People don't interact much, not much action is being taken. If we move a bit higher on the support axis, we get into the comfortable zone. And although this might seem ideal for some, it might feel good. In fact, without challenge, this leads to less engagement, and we actually see less job satisfaction, lower retention rates, and performance suffers. We're not growing. Now, if we go to low support, high challenge, that upper left quadrant, we're in the unrelenting environment. And this environment is really filled with anxiety and greater levels of stress. This environment creates a culture where people are worried about taking appropriate risks. They feel less empowered and likely won't share ideas, which ultimately hurts the development of the organization and the mission. Now, if we go to the top right, high support, high challenge, this is our facilitative environment. And this is really the ideal space that we want to be playing in, working in. This combination of support and challenge creates a culture where people are free to explore and grow, take calculated risks. And it leads to greater achievements, productivity, and happiness. And not only does this environment encourage growth and development within the individual, but it fosters teamwork, trust, and open communication amongst a group. So innovation goes up. So let's pull up the poll, and I would love to see how each of you would respond. We're just going to ask which environment do you feel like you're currently operating in? And it shifts. So let's anchor it to the last month or so. So stagnant, low challenge, low support. Comfortable, high support, but not feeling challenged. Unrelenting, a little bit anxious, high challenge, not feeling supported or facilitative. All right, let's give 2 more seconds, and then let's see the results pop up. Okay, so we have, and I'm thinking everyone can see this, but we have 18% in stagnant, 36%, so most are in that comfortable zone. 14% is that unrelenting environment, which in terms of stress and anxiety, it's good when we're considering that overall well-being. And then 34% is our second highest, which is lovely to see, are in that facilitative environment where they feel like they have the right balance of challenge and support. So here, now let's shift this question a little bit. Now think about others on your team. So whether you're a leader or a teammate, because we all are the people that are that support for other people, what zone do you think that they are in? We don't have a poll for this, but just reflect on it, think about it, take into account the different mindsets and activation that Eve spoke about, different mindsets that people have, how they approach situations. And this isn't a perfect science, but if we go off your numbers, that would mean that 36% of them are in that comfortable zone. So maybe some people need more challenge, that 14% are in that unrelenting zone. So maybe they need more support, and 18 are in that stagnant where they're not feeling supported or challenged. A couple of years back, I was mentoring a colleague, and they shared with me during a mentoring session that they often got feedback that when they were doing trainings, they came off as very confident. And this might seem like good feedback, but it actually added more stress to them. Although they were very well spoken, very articulate, they had high levels, I would almost say anxious levels of preparation, but not the confidence to go along with it. So ultimately, they felt misunderstood. And in their minds, others were setting this unrealistic bar for them. So they did not feel supported. And as a leader, a peer, colleague, teammate, communication is really key, because often we don't know if we don't ask. And those around us don't know if we don't tell them. The more we communicate, the more we can deliberately focus on balancing challenge and support, both for ourselves and for others around us.
And along with this communication, what we're also going to talk about is being able to, going back to the conditions that Meg was talking about earlier, we need to set the conditions to effectively challenge and support people. And so what we're going to do, go ahead and move to the next slide. We're going to talk about 3 very specific conditions. And these conditions are what research shows support both well-being and performance, and also seem to be ones that are lacking in organizations. So we're going to talk about purposeful progress, which is inspiring growth and promoting performance in people; voice, which is encouraging people to speak up about challenges, concerns, feedback, ideas, etc.; and choice, which is embracing diversity and supporting individual strengths and building motivation and commitment. We're going to dive into each of these and define them as we go. And then at the very end, we'll talk about the strategies we can leverage to build these specific conditions. Okay, so let's move to the next slide and talk about purposeful progress. Purposeful progress is our natural tendency to want to grow and develop. We want to be set up for success. We want to experience that growth. The research refers to this as our need for competence. And so how can we set people up to feel like they're being supported in their competence? We can help them by setting the conditions to experience flow. So what you're seeing on this graph is a graph of the different states we can experience, and what the goal is to get to this state called flow. Flow is those moments often referred to as being in the zone. You'll hear that a lot in sports, but those moments where we are completely absorbed in our activity. It's like time is standing still, nothing else matters, and we experience high levels of positive emotion. The benefits of being in flow is that we experience those positive emotions. We experience intrinsic motivation. We tend to be more engaged and have better self-regulation. And what is really cool about flow is it's also really good for our well-being. When we're in flow, our brain releases chemicals like oxytocin, serotonin, dopamine, all those chemicals that we seek, sometimes in not so healthy ways and sometimes in really healthy ways. And we can get those same experiences in our brain by setting people up to experience flow at work. Now, how do we get there though? How do we get to flow? Well, taking a look at this chart, one way to get there is to balance our perception of challenge and our perception of skill. So what you see on the vertical axis is our perception of challenge, with the top being, oh, this is really hard. The bottom being, oh, this is a little bit easy. So high challenge, low challenge. On that horizontal axis, what you're seeing is our perception of skill. Do I feel very, very skilled at this, so at the high end, or do I feel like I don't have enough skill for this task, so at the low end? So when we're given any task that we might have to do, we're going to perceive that task as we're going to have a perception for how challenging it is, and we're going to have a perception of our skill for that task. So for example, if I receive a task and I think that task is really hard and I'm not very good at doing this task, I might find myself in that anxiety zone, right? On the other end, if I receive a task and I perceive this task as fairly easy and my skill level as pretty high, I might find myself in that relaxation zone. So the goal then is, how can we find that flow zone? To find flow, one of the ways to do that is we call it a balance, but it's not really a balance. It's about challenging people just above our skill level, or challenging ourselves just above our skill level. And what that little bit of extra challenge does for us is it helps us engage in the task or activity in a way that we can grow and develop, and not be distracted by being too worried about it being too hard, or distracted by being bored. So to find flow, challenge just above the skill level. As our skills develop, we challenge a little bit more, right? And then as our skills develop, we challenge a little bit more. Being in flow is going to help us find that place of confidence and help set ourselves up to grow and develop, because we're experiencing those positive emotions, that intrinsic motivation, that engagement, that self-regulation, and that high well-being. The next condition we're going to talk about is voice.
Thank you, E. Yes, promoting voice creates a culture of communication that can help prevent problems and achieve group goals. So the term voice describes our ability to take that interpersonal risk in our work environment. So we ask the question that's on our mind, we point out the mistake or the problem that we see, we ask for help when we need it, or we share an idea. And not only do we do this without the fear of embarrassment or humiliation or retaliation, but we're encouraged to do so. The environment, the people around us encourage this sharing. It's just the matter of course. And in the research, this is called psychological safety. And psychological safety has really been a hot topic, well, for the past few years. But the hesitation that I most often hear when I talk about psych safety with leaders in particular is about motivation and performance. They're asking, are we getting the job done? And psychological safety alone really won't necessarily create high-performing teams. That motivation is still necessary for that growth and that drive. If we think about this in terms of a car analogy, motivation would be the gas, and psychological safety is taking your foot off the brake. So I'm not sure if anyone here on the webinar has ever left your emergency brake on and tried to go at top speed, but it's not good for the car, and it's definitely not good for that car's performance. So let's take a look at these different zones. And again, I'm going to ask you, we'll pull up a poll afterwards. So think about which zone you're currently in. If we have low levels of accountability, so holding people accountable for what they're supposed to be doing, and low levels of psychological safety, we're in this apathy zone. So not much is happening here. People show up, but do they really? There's no accountability, so it doesn't really matter if they're getting anything done, and nobody talks about it. So that car would be at a standstill. The comfort zone, you're coasting along, you're cruising, but still no accountability. You do feel free, however, to share anything that's popping up on your mind. So ideas, mistakes, challenges that you have. The high accountability, low psych safety, this is an anxiety zone. So this is where we see hesitation. We're pressing on the brakes. People feel on edge. They maybe will talk about issues offline or behind other people's backs, but they wouldn't bring it up. They wouldn't share in a meeting with everybody. So really, true efficient progress is really halted. So the top right quadrant is our high performance and learning zone. And this is when we're full steam ahead, people collaborate and learn, and they're held to clear high standards, because we know that that is one strategy to continue performance, continue growth. So let's pull up the poll for this again, and think about, let's say, we'll take the last month or so and identify which zone that you would say that your current work environment is in. Is it apathy zone, comfort zone, anxiety zone, or the high performance and learning zone? All right, we're going to be quick this time. Let's get your answers in and we'll see the results. Ooh, I love this. So 45% of individuals on the call are saying high performance and learning zone. 24% are in that anxiety zone, 22 comfort zone, and that apathy zone. I don't know why we have a particular aversion to different ones. If we're driving well-being and performance, we always want that top right. But that apathy zone, there's just so much growth to happen on both sides. So again here, let's just think about the indicators that you see that made you select that zone, because there's benefits for both the individual and the organization, and communication here is really key. So the individual, they feel heard, they feel valued, trusted, they feel that challenge, and there's that sense of belonging, so that our need for connection is really being hit if we're in that high performance learning zone, because I trust that you can do this task. I trust that you can do it to a high standard, and I want to hear what you have to say about it. And ultimately, this also benefits the organization because mistakes are prevented, innovation occurs at a much more rapid rate, and change can be also adopted at a quicker rate. So finding these strategies, thinking of ways that we can increase that psychological safety while still holding high standards is really critical for performance and well-being. So that's voice. The next organizational condition that we'll talk about is choice.
Thanks, Meg.
Yeah.
Okay, so this final condition is choice. And choice is really about having a sense of agency or willingness to participate in the tasks and activities that we are assigned, or just do for fun. This choice is referred to as autonomy in the research. The benefits of feeling autonomous is increased motivation. We are more committed. We're more likely to take initiative, which is something we hear about often, like we really want our people to take initiative, or we really want to take initiative and we're not quite sure how. We're more likely to be engaged, and we experience decreased stress and burnout. All the stuff that we would really like to see for ourselves and others. The way we're going to look at choice is by looking at choice's relationship with engagement. So another one of our quad charts, and be prepared, I get a poll this time. So I'm going to ask you about this specific quad chart and where you think you're at currently on this quad chart at the end here. So what we're looking at here is high autonomy, low autonomy on that vertical axis. So high choice, low choice, right? I feel like I have a sense of willingness up here at the top for high autonomy, or I feel controlled down here for low autonomy on the bottom of that vertical axis. In relation to, on that horizontal axis, negative versus positive engagement. And when I'm talking about engagement, what I'm talking about is our emotional, cognitive, and behavioral quality in our participation with the tasks that we're doing. So where are my emotions at? Am I focused on that task? Am I behaviorally, am I doing the task? At what level am I doing the task? Is it just, or am I going above and beyond? All right, so let's talk about what that looks like in each of these quadrants. So let's start up here with this resistant quadrant. So you see high autonomy, which is what we want, right? But still negatively engaged. So people are actively resisting, refusing to do tasks, or their focus is somewhere else. So they're doing the task, but they're talking about the plans they have later that evening with their family, right? High autonomy, but still negatively engaged. So maybe you have autonomy, you're provided autonomy, but you don't have support, right? So some things can happen. Autonomy is a little bit tricky. We need to give it to people, but we also have to support people. Moving down to that bottom left quadrant, absent, this is when we're negatively engaged in low autonomy. So we've lost that autonomy, we feel a little bit controlled. People are not actively resisting, but they're not actively participating in the task. I've heard this a lot as that quiet quitting, where people are physically there, but they're not really there mentally, emotionally. So they're not engaged in the activity in terms of their focus, or their emotion is kind of apathetic. Now, if we move over and stay on this low autonomy side, what you see in that bottom right corner is mimicry. So people are doing the task, they're doing what they're expected to do, but they're not going above and beyond. They're not taking that initiative. So maybe they feel supported and their emotions are moving towards a happier place, or maybe a content place out of that apathy, but they don't have autonomy. So they're just going through the motions. What we're really looking for is up in this upper right-hand quadrant, where we see autonomously engaged. And what happens when we can find that right amount of autonomy for people, people are on task, taking initiative, their focus is in the moment, and they're going above and beyond with the tasks and activities that they have to do. Okay, so I said I was going to ask you. You guys have a good idea of each of these quadrants now. Let's toss up this poll. And for, let's say, yeah, about the last 3 months, where do you think you're at right now? Absent, resistant, mimicry, autonomously engaged. Okay, it's going to be a quick one too. Let's see how people are doing with choice in their current environments. Oh, man, this looks awesome. That absent, like 2%. Like we're none of that quiet quitting here. Really cool. 6% at the resistance. So maybe a lot of autonomy, but struggling with maybe some support or something else. Some people at that mimicry place, but 77% are autonomously engaged. That is really, really awesome. The really cool thing that I like about this specific chart is it talks about very specific, like my emotion, my focus, and my behavioral engagement. And if I see that I'm in a place where I don't want to be, or I see other people in a place where I don't want them as a leader, or they're my colleague and I want to help them out, you can come back in, look at this chart and think about, man, do they have the autonomy that they need? And for other people, that's about giving choice. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. But for ourselves, sometimes that's about learning to connect what we do with who we are. And that can help us feel like we have choice and autonomy in the things that we're doing. Okay. How are we feeling, Meg? We want to jump into some of these strategies?
Let's do it. Yes. So we've outlined a number of different organizational conditions. And what we've done for you here, because looking through the research, what we found is that particular strategies tend to promote more than one organizational condition. So we combine this list of strategies that actually tackle all of the conditions that, or drive all of the conditions. I don't think they're being tackled. They're being driven with each of these different strategies. So we will go through these strategies, and we'll also give you a resource we'll send with to you after the webinar. We'll get this resource with some more information, but we'll do a quick review here just to see if there's any questions. The first strategy we're talking about is clear vision and goals. So by articulating clear and specific goals, timelines, vision, and standards, and painting a really clear picture of what success looks like is really important, because if we know the end state, we're more likely to find ways to get there, and each individual is different. So there's more than one way to peel an orange. If we're uncertain, it's important that we ask questions, right? Particularly in remote environments where communication might be limited. If we have this clear goal, or if we're asking questions to get that clear goal, then we're all operating on the same page.
Okay, so the next one is prioritize the why. When we're giving people tasks and activities, or we're jumping into tasks and activities ourselves, we want to emphasize the purpose, what's at stake, why it matters, and for whom. When we're able to connect the why of the activity to purpose, to people's values, to the goals or the project that we're doing, we increase motivation. We go from I'm going to do this because I have to I'm going to do this because it matters and I'm more committed. So when you're jumping into activities or you're assigning activities, keep the purpose in mind, discuss and ask for clarity if you're not clear on what the why is for this specific task.
The next strategy we'll talk about is modeling humility and curiosity. So with curiosity, we want to ask a lot of questions about others' challenges, their ideas, their concerns, their feedback, what zone they're in each of these different organizational conditions. We learn about them more, what they're struggling with, what they're good at, what their strengths are. In terms of humility, we want to demonstrate situational humility. So identify and share with others where you have gaps in knowledge and skills and abilities. And after you share those areas of development, also what's your plan to work on those, asking for help if you need so. Perfection is intimidating for people. So when we're able to share the ways that maybe we've grown in the past or that we're growing now, that helps us all be open so that we can support each other in growing. Back to you, E.
Yeah, the next one is offering choice. So we've already talked about the importance of choice, and a lot of people are like, well, how do I offer choice? Like, we can't always offer choice. Well, the goal of creating choice isn't always about like giving people choice about what the project is, but can they develop and execute the plan for that project? Can you encourage people to identify focus areas and strategies for their own development? What are they doing outside of the project, right? So giving choice isn't always about you do this or you don't. It's about how can I plan to do these things I have to do, and giving people the opportunity to develop that plan and then put it into action themselves.
The next strategy is praising input and initiative. So you had just mentioned a little bit ago that we often hear about we want people to take initiative. So a way to do this is to praise that when it happens. So in terms of input, we want to acknowledge and praise, appreciate people's questions, ideas, concerns, and challenges that they're sharing. And when someone shares, offering that appreciation can, in front of the group, can encourage everyone to continue to share. When we praise people's willingness to take that initiative, so they're assessing the situation and then acting independently on these tasks or projects, we can also do this in a group forum as well. And this can be from a leader or it can be peer-to-peer. So the more that we're shining a light on this type of behavior, the more we're moving into that zone of operating within the organization.
Okay, so the next one is to destigmatize failure. So failure happens on a continuum. Some failure are avoidable and might be like something like compliance related, and some are more complex, intelligent, and even praiseworthy. Like when we're taking important risks for the projects that we're doing. When failures are due to complexity or pushing the limits, these should be discussed and sometimes even celebrated. This is how we learn and grow, through communication and pushing the limits. On top of understanding this continuum, it's also important that we admit our own failures and mistakes, frame failures as a learning process, and look forward, offer help. Discuss the failure and brainstorm together how you're going to fix what happened, what the next steps are, and frame the projects that you have coming up as learning problems, not as execution problems. Identify where there's uncertainty and the need for interdependence and collaboration. Set expectations about failure.
All right, the next strategy is providing and seeking feedback. So this one's right under failure because when we're providing that feedback, maybe we can limit and alter the failure, but also it's just helping with that growth. And when there is failure, this is part of the process. So we're providing caring, direct, and honest feedback in a timely manner. So not just once a year during an annual review, but on a consistent, timely manner. And then we're asking for that caring, direct, and honest feedback from the people that we're working with. So we're given a chance to model how we can effectively accept that feedback and that we're still looking to grow as well. And then one more
And
strategy.
yeah, and finally, maintain accountability. And I think this also really connects to the failure and feedback that we've already talked about. Oftentimes, when we're discussing these conditions or maintaining, helping support well-being, people think, well, I have to maintain accountability. Well, you can do both. And actually maintaining accountability will show that you care about people. So you want to make sure that you're still holding people accountable to the set standards, making sure that those standards are clear, and encourage other people to hold each other accountable as well, and then sanction clear violations. Make sure everybody knows what's going on.
So these are the strategies. As I said, we'll send out a resource with a bit more information on each of those. But yeah, I think we can go to the next slide and we'll be ready for some Q&A.
That's really good information, guys. This is your time to ask questions of the panelists on anything you may have heard today. I don't see anything immediately in the queue, but we did have a couple questions that were submitted by attendees in advance. So I think we'll jump to those as the participants are thinking of their questions, having diverging on the resources that you guys have just given. So the first question we got was, how can you build connections virtually while working at home and having it dispersed across the country, employees or teams, and getting connection there?
Yeah, I could jump in to start, and then we can kick this around. Connection is hard even when we're in person. So being virtual, it just adds that additional layer and complexity. I think some of the strategies that we mentioned up front are really important, just to have that continuous communication during feedback. But I think also having times when we're in this virtual environment, we don't have the, what is it called, water cooler talk, where we're walking down the hallway, we're checking in with people. So I think having some sort of way to communicate that isn't directly about projects or tasks, but maybe it's about some things that are going on in people's lives, having an avenue to learn more about people. So I think that's one strategy. During meetings, we can start off with maybe like a little breakout room, or, someone sharing something for the weekend. So we're just learning more about people, because you might find out something really interesting that has to do with their well-being. You can learn more if someone's frustrating you, they don't seem to respond right away, but then that they're taking care of their elderly parent, or they're struggling to get the kids going back and forth. You learn more about them, and then that just gives you more awareness what's going on in their life, so how to support them more, or you can ask how to support them more. John, anything you would add to that?
I would add on that we almost have to ask even more than we do in person, right? Because it's a lot harder to read activation and mindsets through a screen, but I can still notice when things are a little off with the people that I work with. And so asking those questions, even if it has to be like a call outside of work to check in on where are people standing, how are they perceiving this meeting, right? And making sure that if you notice that people aren't speaking up in meetings, giving them the opportunity to speak up and call out to help build that psychological safety, even digitally.
Mm-hmm.
The only other thing I would add is nonverbals in the virtual world. There is power in ensuring your camera is on, that you send messages via virtual means, that you're attentive and present and so forth within Zoom or Teams or whatever medium you're using.
Those are all great suggestions. Looks like we just got a question in the queue. As an MFLAC, which is our military family life counseling program here at Magellan, how do I engage leadership to utilize my services when soldiers are not seeking out my services? So without going into the details of what those services may be, can the team answer or give some guidance on that?
I find, at least with our work, I often find, and if you think about that chart, that step chart that John was talking about in the beginning, I think oftentimes people don't seek services because there's a little bit of a inertia. They don't know what services to seek, or they don't know what you provide for them. So I think at a baseline level is just providing some educational meetings with some of those leaders to make sure that they know exactly what you provide and how those soldiers could get in touch with you.
I think the other thing that might be helpful is figure out when their events are and try to go if it's possible. I'm not sure if that's possible. That's just something that I found worked really well in my past experience.
I like that. That's good insight. Another submitted question. How is Magellan helping build or reinforce human connection among its current employees and programs?
Oh, let me jump in on that real quick. Number one, with our product that we're building, we're demonstrating within our own culture and our own organization. And we've actually had executive leaders who are in it, investing in it, are present and engaging and interacting with folks in the community learning system that we're developing. And that can be really impactful because it kind of sets the stage for everybody else, that model coming down from the top. And then the second thing I would add from a Magellan perspective is I think we really do a nice job of encouraging vulnerability and a safe space to be able to share what is going on that Megan E talked about, what might be going on at home, and being able to share emotions in that and just allow the others in your teams to really understand what's going on with you internally without judgment. And we do a really nice job of that in our organization.
I like that. We have a couple more questions coming in. We can probably just grab one more so we have time to close out and give you guys the takeaway and the resources that you need. So let me see the top one here. Do you have any suggestions on how to encourage leadership to prioritize workplace and wellness or well-being?
Yeah, I think I'm going to go now. Get your thoughts together, Meg. I think education, again, is so important. Often I think that people at high levels, and this is not a knock at all on them, they have a lot on their plate, but sometimes it's like, what is my return on investment? And I worked with a military leader once that I loved how he spoke about the work that I was doing with his brigade. He was saying that instead of thinking of it as like a tax that you're paying, right? Like this time is something that we have to work into the schedule, and it's like after the fact, nobody likes losing that money. He wanted everyone to have a paradigm shift and think about it as an investment. So the more that we're investing up front, the more time that we put into these trainings and talking about this information, ultimately toward the end, we're going to have higher performance. We're going to have less issues with whether it's behavioral health or just problem behaviors. We're going to have higher performances, and that time invested, we won't need to keep doing, hours of training as we're just working this in. It just becomes part of the organization, the part of the kind of circulatory system of the organization. So I think knowing what the organization and what the individuals are getting by doing this training really helps leaders embrace and encourage the use of these skills, these mental skills.
And I'd go all the way back to, the slides and what I was trying to brief at the very beginning, which is that performance will come. Trust the process. Performance will come if you take care of people. And so it's just like, I hate to say it, but it's just like the copy machine. If you maintain the copy machine well, you're going to get a good output from the copy machine. So if you focus on increasing the well-being of your people and trust the process, you will get high productivity. So, and oftentimes we flip that and just focus on the end product.
Perfect. Well, Oh, go
One
ahead.
last thing before you close
Yes,
out.
go ahead.
I would encourage people, if you do nothing else after this webinar, is to look at those conditions that we reviewed and have conversations with the people in your organization. So see where they are, what's causing them to be that in that zone. See what's causing that, see where you need to make adjustments, and then see where you can like shine the light on what's working so you can start to shift in all of those areas. Thanks, Lindsay.
No, that's perfect. And I know we didn't get to everyone's questions today, so we are bringing up a slide now where you can reach us at any time at that email at the bottom of the screen there. So MFedinform@Magellan Federal. So if you want to drop your question in there, I know some of them are anonymous, but if you're comfortable sharing your name and want to get a direct answer, we are happy to answer you there. Otherwise, we will share this the replay, the presentation, along with the resource sheet that Meg mentioned in an email following this call as well. So thank you all for attending, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your day and you learned something today. So hope you join us again. Thanks all. Bye.